Good afternoon. It's Bill from Suffolk in the UK here, and this is the first in what's going to be a number of videos on the subject of converting this fine vehicle here, taking her to some very interesting places and sharing my experiences with you. Now, I'm obviously aware that there's a number of high quality videos out there already, and you might well ask, so what's the difference with this one? An observation I would make is that a lot of the videos, their approach is to buy a new high-end 4x4, bolt on a lot of very expensive accessories, and away you go. And they use words like the extreme conversion, the ultimate conversion in the title. That is not my approach. By training, I am an engineer, and I believe in value for money, fitness for purpose, and where necessary, make do and mend. And so I'm going to call this the engineer's conversion. But I will demonstrate it's possible to have just as much fun in an old vehicle like this as it is in a modern 4x4 costing many times more. Now, to convert a vehicle like this and keep her running reliably does require a lot of maintenance and technical knowledge. And ideally, the owner can do that himself, but failing that, he will need to enlist the services of a good local mechanic who can do it for him. This first video is going to be looking at some of the technical details of the conversion, and it's really aimed at the 4x4 enthusiast. Subsequent videos are going to be of more general interest. So if you're ready, we'll now begin the tour. I'd now like to give a general introduction to this vehicle and talk a bit about how I came to select it. For an expedition vehicle, it's fairly unconventional. It's a little bit small. It's more normal to choose something like a Toyota Land Cruiser or Land Rover 110 or 130 rather than a Defender 90 like this. So how did I come to choose it? Well, the answer is that when I bought it back in 2000, I didn't know any better. I'd been working abroad, I came back to the UK, I wanted to start doing trips, and I didn't really know where to start. I went to Witham Specialist Vehicles, who handle the disposal of military vehicles in the UK, and I picked this one out of a line of broadly similar Land Rovers, although this was a particularly good example. In technical terms, this is what's known as a TUW, which is Truck Utility Winterized. It's got winterizing kit and is suitable for operations in the Arctic Circle. But more than that, it's also what's known as a wader, and meant for amphibious operations. When I bought her, the snorkel was very much higher. I've had to cut it down to get the roof rack on. But there was also a painted mark on the windscreen about halfway up, which was the permitted wading depth. But importantly, she's never been waded, or certainly not in salt water. Take her into salt water even once, and salt gets everywhere, and it's just going to corrode. Now, this vehicle has some bad points and some good points. On the negative side, as I've already said, she's a little bit small and she ought to be a bit bigger for what I want to do with her. The other point is that she was grossly underpowered. When loaded up, it weighs about 2.5 tons, and it was fitted with the old normally aspirated Land Rover diesel engine, which puts out less than 70 bhp, and she was extremely slow. On the positive side, firstly, the chassis and bodywork in absolutely excellent condition. There was no rust on her when I bought her, and indeed that remains the case until today. But secondly, because of her age, and she's manufactured in 1991, there are no electronics, and so there's nothing electronic to go wrong. If you do have a problem when you're on a trip somewhere, the odds are that you're going to be able to fix it yourself, or failing that, you will find a mechanic who can do it for you. Well, so much for the general intro. I'd now like to start looking at some of the details of the vehicle. Let us start at the business end under the bonnet. As I told you in the introduction, one of the big problems with the vehicle was that it was very underpowered, and hence a high priority was to source a more powerful engine. The ideal solution would be to find a Land Rover TDI. However, at that time, which was the year 2000, they simply weren't available. There was, however, quite an industry installing Japanese turbo diesels into Defenders, and this was the route that we went. For those of you who can recognise it, this is the Daihatsu 2.8 TDI, which comes from the 4-track. It's adequately powerful, it has 100 bhp, and it has a very good reputation for reliability. Even though the engine itself is very suitable as a standalone unit, from the moment you install it into a Defender, you end up with a hybrid. And having a hybrid brings a whole host of problems, as I will show you later on in the video. This is not the ideal place from which to start building an expedition vehicle. My first big shock occurred just a couple of months after we had the engine changed. I was driving back from Le Mans in France, and out of the blue the new clutch failed. When we stripped it down to find what had gone wrong, the root cause of the problem was that there was relative movement between the engine and the gearbox, and this had ripped the centre out of the clutch. I have here the adapter ring and the bell housing, which were in use at the time of the clutch and gearbox failure. The first thing to note about the adapter ring is that not all of the studs are there. And secondly, there are no dowels. If we offer up the bell housing, you'll see that everything is a very loose fit. And as I recall it, the nuts which have been used were simple nuts, they weren't nylops, they didn't have lock nuts or anything, they'd loosened off, which just exacerbated the problem. Furthermore, if we look at the sizes here, that one is just on 11mm, which will actually be a UNF size, and lo and behold, the studs are 8mm studs. This is a very low quality item, should never have been fitted to any vehicle. We replaced it with a high precision unit from Milner off-road, and that's performed superbly ever since, no problems. I've had it in for about 200,000 kilometres. The company which did the work for me, they were an absolute menace to the Land Rover industry in the UK. They've been out of work for a number of years, and all I can say is good riddance to them. My second big shock occurred just a couple of months later, and that was when the input shaft to the gearbox failed, or at least its bearing did. And again we stripped it down and we found that the root cause was exactly the same. It was overstressed because of the relative movement. We had of course changed the adapter ring for a high precision item, but the damage had already been done, and obviously if we'd realised it at the time that we changed the clutch, we would have changed the gearbox at the same time. I learnt a couple of very hard and very bitter lessons. Firstly, I realised how long it was going to take me to make this vehicle reliable and do exactly what I wanted it to do. And in fact, it took a number of years until I got it to that stage. But secondly, I also realised that the quality of parts and workmanship out there was very variable, and I simply could not rely on other people to do the work for me. I firstly had to become a great deal more technically knowledgeable myself, but also I had to undertake a lot more of the work myself. And since then I have done almost all of the mods and upgrades myself, although I do take the vehicle to a workshop for servicing because I like to have a second pair of eyes looking over it. At the end of the day, these problems, although painful at the time, probably served me in good stead. I have become very much more technically proficient. When I'm on a trip, I can keep the vehicle going, and if we do have a problem on the road, 9 times out of 10 I can sort it out myself.